Okay everybody, in this video we are going to start our Lab 3 and the way we're going to get that started is we're going to go to Canvas and we're going to open up the file Lab 3 start. Okay, and that's what you're looking at right now. So before I get started and start going through the steps here, a couple of things that I want you to recognize. That there are 5 networks here. They are lettered: network A, B, C, D, and E. Each network has its own network ID. Otherwise, things just would not work. Every sub-network must have a unique network ID. And then the IP addresses for the individual devices must have addresses such that the network ID is common amongst all of the devices in that network. For example, network A has the network ID of 192.168.1.0 and it has a subnet mask of /24. In fact, small note, everything in this lab has a subnet mask with a CIDR notation of /24. 24 binary bits representing the subnet mask. So we have the network ID of 192.168.1.0, and every device in here is going to share that network ID in its IP address. So the interface for router 1 will be 192.168.1.1. The VLAN 1 on switch A will be 192.168.1.5. PC 0 will be 192.168.1.10, and then finally PC 1 will be 192.168.1.20. Okay? Super. Let's now move to connecting everything up here. So we'll go to our connections. We'll use our straight through cables. And we'll go from PC 0 here, Fast Ethernet 0, over to Fast Ethernet 01. Then from PC 1, Ethernet 0, to switch A, Fast Ethernet 02. Then from switch A, Fast Ethernet 24, to fast on router 1 to Fast Ethernet 00 on router 1. Okay, so that's our first network. It's hooked up. A couple of things you'll notice. We've got a couple of green indicators here. You'll notice this orange. This orange will eventually turn green as well. What's happening is the switch is currently doing some processing and trying to figure some things out. The connection to the router will continue to stay red until we get the IP addresses figured out on the router. Okay. Now let's move on to network B. Again, network B, all of the devices share the network ID of 192.168.2.0. Let's hook this thing up. So we'll start with PC2, Ethernet 0. We'll go to switch B here and Fast Ethernet 01. Next, PC3, Fast Ethernet 0 to switch B, Fast Ethernet 02. And then from our switch B up to our router, so we'll go from Fast Ethernet 24 to our router 1 and select Fast Ethernet 01. Excellent. Let's next we'll move on to network C. It has a network ID of 192.168.3.0, and we'll hook it up. So PC4, Fast Ethernet 0 to Fast Ethernet 01 on switch C. PC5 Fast Ethernet 0 to switch C Fast Ethernet 02. Then from our switch C Fast Ethernet 24 to our router, and just watch this. Okay, we're going to go to Fast Ethernet 01 on this connection. Let's just move that over a little bit. There we go. So that's now connected. Moving over to network D, the network ID is 192.168.4.0. So PC6 Fast Ethernet 0 to switch D Fast Ethernet 01. Then PC7 Fast Ethernet 0 to switch 0 Fast Ethernet 02. Then Fast Ethernet, or I'm sorry, from switch D Fast Ethernet 24 to our router 2 Fast Ethernet 00. If you haven't already noticed, I like to have a little symmetry. It also helps me to remember what is connected where and what ports are what. So the last piece that we have to do is for network E. And again, network E is 192.168.5.0. It's network ID. The connection that we're going to be using between router 1 and router 2 is a serial connection. Okay, and we will be specifically we'll be using, if you look down the list here, serial 00. Now, serial cables are right here down below. You'll notice these red lightning bolts. One has this additional symbol. That's a clock. Okay. So the question is whether or not you're going to start with the device with the clock or without the clock. Out of habit, I always start with the device with the clock. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to go up to my router 1 and I'm going to select serial 00, and I'm going to stretch over and I'm going to hook that into serial 00 on router 2. Okay, so there's our connection. Now I'm going to hover my mouse over this connection and I want you to look at the labels on either side of this connection on router 1 and router 2. So I hover over that. Notice how the the labels come up. So on router 1, you'll notice it says serial 00 or SE00. And notice that there's a clock symbol there. Okay. The clock symbol is there because I selected that red lightning bolt with the clock symbol and started on router 0 first and then went over to router 2. If I had started on router 2 and then went to router 1 with that connection, the clock symbol would have been on router 2 instead. You'll also notice that router 2, its label, serial 00, does not have the clock label. So what is this clock all about? In a serial connection, one of the devices must provide clocking. In other words, it controls the rate in which communications occur. And the way it controls that rate, it uses a clock. And one of these devices has to have a clock, the other must not. Okay? Often in class, I talked and showed you last week that blue cable that was kind of thick, and I told you it was a serial cable, and I passed it around, and you noticed that one end had a DCE label on it and the other end had a DTE label. The DCE, and I emphasize the C, that's the clock side. Okay, so you want to plug that end of that cable, the DCE end, into the device that is going to provide clocking. In this case, in our lab, that is router 01. The other end of that cable, the DTE side, gets plugged into router 2. Okay, so again, one device provides clocking, the other does not. One end gets the DCE end of the cable, the other gets the DTE side of the cable. Okay? I hope that's clear, and if it's not, I hope that you will write that down on a list of questions that you have and you send that to me. Okay? So that's our first step. Moving on. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to configure all of the IP addresses for our PCs. Okay? So let's just refer back to our lab instructions. And if we come down here, let's see. Let's open this up a little bit. That's not what I wanted to do. Move that right there. So I've given you all of the IP addresses. The only thing that you need to remember is when setting the IP addresses for your PCs that you have to remember to put in the gateway address. And the gateway address is always going to be whatever your network ID is, 192.168.1.0, and the IP address for this router interface. So the gateway address is 192.168.1.1. Okay? The gateway address for network B is going to be 192.168.2.1. Where is that 1? We're missing that 1 there. There should be a little 1. We'll fix that in a minute in the diagram. Anyway, set all of your IP addresses. So let's go about and do that for each one of our devices. So starting with PC 0, we click on that. We're going to go over to desktop. We're going to go to let's see. No, we're going to go to config. Then we're going to put in the gateway 192.168.1.1. That's your gateway address for PC 0. We're going to go to our fast Ethernet adapter. We're going to plug in 192.168.1.10. It will automatically jump to a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0, which again in CIDR notation is a /24, which is what we are specifying. So that is correct. We'll close that out. Let's go to PC 1. Let's do the same thing. So gateway is 192.168.1.1. Then the IP address for the adapter is 192.168.1.20. We'll hit a tab, subnet mask automatically pops up, and we are good to go. So we'll close this out. Now, just to confirm, let's mouse over our PC 0. You'll notice that the IP address is set for fast Ethernet 0 at 192.168.1.10 with a /24. It's kind of interesting. Here they show it in CIDR notation, yet in the actual interface when we go to configure it, it's shown in a dotted decimal format. Anyway, down below you'll also notice that the gateway is set to 192.168.1.1. Let's check that for PC 1, make sure that that is correct. That looks right, 192.168.1.20 with a /24, and the gateway is at 192.168.1.1. Very good. Now let's move on to PC 2. This is in network B. So again, your network ID is a 2. So your addresses for PCs 2 and 3 are going to be 2.10 and 2.20. So we'll go in here, go to our config, enter in our gateway as 192.168.2.1, then our fast Ethernet 192.168.2.10. Hit the tab. Automatically pops up with the subnet mask, Class C. We'll close this out. Go to PC3, 192.168.2.1, good. And fast Ethernet is 192.168.2.20. Tab, and the subnet mask jumps in there, so we're good. We'll go back. Let's verify. Okay, so the IP address is set to 192.168.2.10, and the gateway is at 192.168.2.1, so that looks good. Next, PC3 here looks good at 192.168.2.20. and gateway at 192.168.2.1. Okay, moving on. Config. Our network ID here is 192.168.3.0. So our gateway 192.168.3.1. Now, I always have the router interface or the gateway always set to 1. Does it have to be 1? No, it does not. However, it's just a habit with me. I try to set my router IP addresses in the lower end of the IP address range. So I often will start with 1. Okay? It's just habit. There's no set rule that says that we have to do it that way. But for me, it just helps to remember how things are laid out. Okay, so we'll go to fast Ethernet. 68.3.10. And let's do this one. No, can't do that because wrong address. That was the last PC. 3.20. There we go. And we close that out. We confirm the information. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, very good. Now let's finish with PCs 6 and 7. So we'll click on that. We'll go into config. This is network ID 192.168.4.0. So our router address is 192.168.4.1. Ethernet 192.168.4.10. Then PC7, our last, 192.168.4.1 again. Ethernet 192.168.4.20. And that looks good. Just verify. IP address looks good. Gateway looks good. Again with PC0, IP address looks good. Gateway looks good. Okay, good. So we have completed the configuration of our PCs. Okay. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is we want to work on setting up a command file. that we're going to be using to configure our devices. And this may appear initially to be a little on the tedious side, but it will help to reduce the amount of time it takes to configure these devices, as well as keep mistakes to a minimum, or at the very least make it very easy for us to correct any mistakes. Okay, so I've opened up the section of the lab instructions that show what we need to do to both our switches and our routers, and I've created or opened up a notepad file, and I've created a couple of headers for each one of our devices, switches A, B, C, and D, as well as routers 1 and 2. Okay. Now, when creating these command files, the thing that you have to think about is, where do you want to start? Are your commands going to start at the user mode at the very beginning? Are they going to start at the privileged mode? I always start my commands in the global configuration mode after entering the configure T or the configure terminal command. So that's where I always start, and whenever I put these commands, when I paste them into the interface, I've got to be in that mode in order for the commands to be executed properly. So let's get to it. I've got switch A here, and the first thing that we want to do, I better not tab this, we want to configure the host name. So I'm going to say host name, and this is going to be switch A. Okay. Then we want to enable the enable password. So enable password, and if you recall, what is our standard enable password that we're using in our labs? It's just the word password in lowercase letters. From here we'll go on to setting up our console and our VTY. So we'll say line con 0. Then we'll set up the executive timeout to 5 minutes and 0 seconds. We'll set our password for the console. If you recall, that's capital C, then lowercase password. And then log in. Maybe I'll put some spaces in here. Just the spaces won't hurt, but they'll help make this a little more readable for you. Okay. And then we're going to do the VTY. Now, the commands for the VTY are almost identical to the console, so I'm going to copy those. And rather than con, I'm going to put in VTY. 1, 2, 3, delete those. And I'm going to do 0 through 4, okay, for the 5 VTY lines. Our timeout will be set to 5 minutes and 0 seconds. Our password, if you recall, we'll use our standard of vPassword and then the login command. From here, what I need to do is I need to configure the VLAN 1. And I need to then assign the IP address to that VLAN. So we're going to put in int, short for interface, VLAN 1, space 1, and then I'll set the IP address. IP address, abbreviate the word address, 192.168.1.5 with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. Don't forget your no shut for no shutdown. Okay. And let's see, is there anything else that we need to do? No, that's it. Okay. So we're essentially going to do this for each of our 4 switches. So now, again, to make this easy, I'm going to go up. I'm going to highlight all this. I'm going to copy it. We'll go down to switch B. I'm going to paste this down here. I'm going to go in and make my necessary changes. So this is for switch B, so we change the host name. And then the only other thing we need to change is, remember, the thing that we're changing here for switch B is its network ID, or it's a network ID, which is a 2. Okay, 192.168.2.0, but the IP address for VLAN 1 is going to be 192.168.2.5. Okay, so that's it for there. Everything else stays the same. So again, I will copy this. Copy. We'll go to switch C. Paste. Change this to C. Caps lock is on. That would help. Okay. Then come on down and change the IP address for VLAN to 192.168.3.5. Now let's copy for D. Copy. Paste. And there's D. We'll change its name and change its IP address to 4. Okay, there it is. Very good. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to go in and we need to configure our router. Our router has many of the same things that need to be set as in our switches. So just to review, we need to configure the host name. We need to configure the enable password, the console password, telnet, and we need to set timeout to 5 minutes 0 seconds. And then we need to do the IP addresses. All right, so I'm going to copy my host or my switch information again. I'm not going to copy VLAN. We're not doing that. So I'm going to say copy. I'm going to go to router 1 and I'm going to paste that in, and I'm now going to change the information here. So I've got router 1, and all of this information is going to be the same. So there's really nothing I need to change here. I do need to go in and configure the interfaces. So the first interface I'm going to connect to is interface F00, IP address, and on router 1, F00 is 192.168.1.1 with a 255.255.255.0 and a no shut. And I'm just going to copy this, copy it, paste it, and we're going to modify this now to F01. We'll change the IP address to 2.1, and that's good. Then I paste it in again, only this time we're doing the serial port. So the serial port is going to be 5.1, and clock rate, let's make it 2 million. Okay, and that should do it. Okay, so that's router 1. Again, we'll take all of this, copy, and let's go down to router 2 and modify this stuff. So we're going to change that to a 2. Then we're going to change our addresses. So F00 is talking to, that interface is going to be 4. Yeah, 4. 01 is going to be 3, and the serial interface is going to be 5.2. Okay? But remember, in a serial connection, one side is clocking, the other side is not. So router 1 is going to handle clocking, router 2 will not. So we need to get rid of that. Okay. So in the next step, what we'll do is we'll be taking these commands and we'll literally be pasting them into the interfaces for each of the respective devices. Okay, next, as you can see, I've got my packet tracer file up, and I also have on top of that the notepad file that I've just created. And what we're going to be doing is we are going to be copying the commands for each device and then pasting it into the interface, getting it to execute these commands. On the diagram, you'll notice that there's a lot of red, which means a lot of the connections to the router are not running, and you'll see that this stuff is going to quickly start turning to green. So it happens, just very fast. All right, so let's start with switch A. We'll highlight the commands for switch A. Highlight, then we'll say copy. Now we're going to jump over to our switch A. We're going to go into the command line interface. You can see that it's up. I'm going to type in EN for enable and then configure T to get us into the global configuration mode. And now I'm going to hit paste and just enter one more time, and what you'll see is that everything has gone in, all the commands have gone in. This looks pretty good. Okay. And we are good to go for switch A. You'll notice that the name of the switch has changed here. Okay. So this all looks fantastic. If we close this out, and we just hover over switch A, you'll notice that it has taken its IP address. Look all the way at the bottom where it says VLAN 1, and it shows the IP address of 192.168.1.5 with a /24. All right, so let's now go to switch B. So I'm going to toggle back to my commands, highlight everything, do a copy, go into my switch, enter, then EN, then configure T, then we're going to do a paste, and I click on the paste button here and press enter, and that is now up and running. Okay, so we'll close this out. Again, let's toggle back to our commands. Next, switch C, copy, go into switch C, command line interface, EN, configure T, and then we're going to do a paste and press enter twice, and switch C is now configured. Close that out. Let's go to D, command line interface. Oh, wait a second, I need to go to my notepad first. Let's get the commands for switch D. Copy. Then we'll go back to our switch. Press enter, EN for enable, config T for configure terminal. Okay, and then we'll do a paste. So there's D, press enter twice, and we are good to go. All right. We'll close that out. Now we're ready to configure our routers. Okay, this is really hard, isn't it? So we've got our commands for the router here. We're going to highlight everything for the router 1. Do a copy. Sometimes when I go to do a copy, I either use the keystroke for Control C or I use my mouse. I go back and forth. Again, we go to the CLI, We do an EN for enable, configure T to get us into the global configuration. We're going to do a paste, press enter. Okay, notice we've got these greens are coming up. Okay, those oranges will disappear as soon as the router, or I'm sorry, the switches figure things out. While that's occurring, let's go back over to our command file. Let's pick up the commands for router 2. Copy. Go into the interface for router 2. Press enter. EN for enable. Config T for configure terminal. Okay, we'll do a paste. Press enter twice. And that is now up and running. Okay, so now we've got greens all the way around. That orange will disappear. You got greens on your serial port and so on. Let's just hover over things and just make sure that everything looks okay before we take our next step. So we're looking at router 1. Fast Ethernet 00 is set to 192.168.1.1. Fast Ethernet 01 is set to 192.168.2.1. Serial 00 is set to 192.168.5.1. So that all looks very good. Okay, let's take a look at router 2. Router 2 is Fast Ethernet 00, 192.168.4.1, correct. Fast Ethernet 01, 192.168.3.1, that is correct. And finally, Serial 00 is 192.168.5.2. Okay, that's a little different, so just be careful on that one. Okay. Our router 1 side is a .1. Our router 2 side is a .2. Okay, guys, just keep your eyes open for that. Okay, so everything looks pretty good. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of ping tests. I'm going to save this here and then we'll continue on. Okay, so we're back on our packet tracer. And what we want to do now is we just want to test out some of our connections. You'll notice that we've got green indicators across the entire network. And so we're going to ping. And we're going to start with 0. And we'll go to our desktop. We'll go to the command prompt. And now let's ping. Just for kicks, we'll do PC1, which is 192.168.1.20. And we've got a good reply there. Okay. Let's now try pinging PCs 2 and 3 and see how we do there. So PC 2, or we're just going to, let's just do 2. We don't need to do 3. I think I told you in the instructions to do 3. But let's just do 2 for right now. 168, and that is going to be 2.10. May take a moment. Okay, now we're starting to get it. Sometimes when you first go to ping a device, it takes a little while to figure it out. But once it figures it out, it's good to go. Okay. Okay, the next thing that I want to do, trying to get a little more real estate on the screen here. I want to ping our PC4, which is on the other side of the network here, over here, okay? And let's take a look at what occurs when I do that. Ping 192.168.3 dot, and that should be 10, okay? Comes back as unreachable, which is the router's coming back and telling us, I don't know where it is. And this is probably coming back from router number 1. Okay, so we've got a problem here. What I want to do before I move on is I'm going to take a snapshot of this. So I go to my snipping tool, say new, and what is it going to take to have this stop popping up? Okay, let's go to my snipping tool. I'm going to take a copy of that. Now I'm going to open up a Word document, and we'll do a blank document, and we'll paste that in. Okay, so that's the first shot, which shows us that we're not able to ping from the left side of the network to the right side of the network, and we're going to fix that in a little bit, but those are the results that I expected to see. Okay, super. Okay, gang, I made a small mistake. I forgot a command and a requirement on our switches. Specifically, if you look at the instructions over here, we want to configure the default gateway using the command IP default -gateway 192.168x.1, where x is either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Actually, we don't even need it for 5 because there is no switch in network E or network 5. So let's modify our switches. We're going to type in IP default. Now, you don't have to type default gateway all the way out. You can abbreviate it 192.168. So the default gateway, the router interface for network A, is 1.1. Okay, I'm going to take this command, I'm going to copy it to my other switches. Copy. Let's come down here, and I'm going to paste this in here. We're going to change this because this is network 2. I'm going to come down to C. This is 3. And we're going to paste that again. And this is 4. Okay. So we'll then take all of these commands and we will then copy them into the respective switches. Okay. Now I'm going to go back and I'm actually going to edit this, but you need to have that command in your command file. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so based on the results that we saw coming back from that very last ping over to PC4, something is definitely not working. And before I actually show you what the fix is, what I'd like to do is I want to take a look at something in routers 1 and 2. So we're going to close this down. We're going to go into router 01. We'll press enter. Okay. And first password we got to get past is C password. Then enable, and our enable password, which is just lowercase password. Then we're going to go in and we're going to do the command show IP route. And what I want to show you here is you've got this legend here which basically explains the abbreviations, and then down below here is the information we need to look at. So first you've got this C here. That C says it's connected, and it means that this network 192.168.1.0, and notice that's the network ID there, okay, /24 is directly connected to Fast Ethernet 00. The network 192.168.2.0 /24 is directly connected to Fast Ethernet 01, and then 5.0 is directly connected to serial 00. What you don't see here is you don't see anything about network C 192.168.3.0 or network D, which is 192.168.4.0. No information about that. And the reason for that is the routers only see what they are directly connected to. Okay? Well, if that's the case, how do routers figure out how to get from one network to the next? Well, the way they do that is we either tell them where the other networks are, okay, using something called a static route, or we set up our routing protocols. Routing protocols are those protocols that run within a router in which the routers communicate with one another and they share what each knows. So router 1 would share the fact that, hey, I'm connected to network A and network B, and I'm also connected to network E. And it passes that information over to router 2. Now router 2 says, oh, okay, if I need to get to network A, then I need to go through the connection here in the middle, the serial connection, in order to get over to router 1 and then ultimately over to network A. If I need to get to network B, again, from C, I come up through the router, I've got to go through the serial connection, and then I can get to B. So we have to tell both routers that they need to communicate with one another. And we've got multiple routing protocols to choose from. I'm going to use one of the easier network protocols, and it's called RIP. Okay, it's probably one of the most basic. It's been around the longest. It's real easy to set up, and for right now it will serve our purpose very nicely, so let's use that. So I'm going to go into my global configuration mode by typing in config T, and I'm going to say router RIP, and you'll notice that the prompt now changes to config router, and then I'm going to say network, and I'm just going to put in 192.168.1.0. That's the network ID, network 192.168.2.0, and the third network is 192.168.5.0. Now you'll notice that these three networks are the networks that are directly connected to router 1. And you would tend to think that, okay, router 1 should know the network it's connected to. In fact, it does. In our last command, it showed us. However, we need to tell this to the RIP protocol. And we're giving RIP the network IDs based on the networks that are connected to router 1. The other thing that I'm going to do, the last thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to put in version 2. And what this does is it makes the RIP protocol run in version 1 rather than run in version 2 rather than version 1. And I'm not really going to get into why I'm doing that. I would simply just ask you to do that on faith. It would actually run without it, but just for right now, just do that. So we identify each one of the networks, 192.168.1.0, 2.0, 5.0, and then version 2. Okay? And what we're going to do next is we're going to go over and we're going to put these similar commands into router 2. By the way, before I leave here, let me just do this one thing. I'm going to hit Control Z, and it's going to take us back to the privilege mode. And I'm going to do a show IP route again, and you'll notice that it hasn't changed yet. and it won't change until it starts talking to router 2. So I'm going to save this, and then we'll move over to router 2 and we'll make those changes. Okay, we've completed configuring router 1 with the RIP protocol. Now let's go on to router 2 and do the same thing. So we'll click on router 2. We'll get logged in here. 1 second. Enter. C password, then enable, then password for the enable password, config T for configure terminal, and router RIP. Then we're going to identify the networks that router 2 is connected to. Let's see if I can make this smaller and move this around a little bit. No, it just doesn't want. Here, I'll move it over to the other side here. Okay. So router 2 is connected to the following networks. Network 192.168.4, or I'm sorry, 3.0. And watch what I do here. I press enter, okay? And I hit my up arrow key, which allows me to repeat the last command, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to change that to a 4. Press enter, hit the up arrow key again, go over here, change this to a 5, hit enter, and I now have the 3 networks. And remember, the last piece, version 2. Okay, so at this point, RIP, the protocol, has now been set up on router 1 and router 2. And after a couple of seconds, these two are going to start exchanging information about the respective networks that they are connected to. So if, let's say, PC7 is looking for someone on network A, and they send a request to router 2 will now know that network A is accessible through router 1, and it will then route the package over to router 1. So let's hit Control Z. Let's get back to our privilege mode. Now let's take a look at what's going on with our show IP route. And it would help if I spelled it right. Let's up arrow. Okay, let's hit a backspace, press enter, and there it is. Now you'll notice in comparison, let's pull up router 1. I think I've got router 1 in here. Where is router 1? Oh, router 1 has already gone over. It's basically automatically logged us out. But you'll notice that looks very similar to what we had on router 1, but now notice we've got these 2 R's over here. Okay, and the R's, if you look, should indicate that it's for RIP. Where is it? EGIR. Oh, yeah, I'm just blind. Here it is, right here. R is for RIP. So the table here is telling you that it got this information here, okay, from RIP, from the routing protocol. And what it's telling us is that if you wish, you're on router number 2, and if you wish to get to router or to network 192.168.1.0, you're going to have to go through port serial 00 heading towards 192.168.5.1. Okay. Now, let's go over to router 1. Let's look at the same thing. C password, then enable, show, oh, sorry, password. Okay, what did I mess up here? Enable password. Password is lowercase. There we go. Now show IP route. and you'll now see that the information is similar. It's in different order, okay? But all of the information's there. The routing tables are now complete. Okay, at this point we can go back to our PC0 and we can try to again ping PC6. Okay, so let's move this over here. We're going to go to PC0. We're going to go to our command prompt, and again I'm going to up arrow and pull up the ping command for 192.168.3.10. Okay, so we'll do 3.10. Okay, which is, I think, what is that? PC4? Yeah, that's PC4 right here. Okay, so let's ping that. Let's see what happens. Give it a moment. There we go. It's working. Okay, so now we're able to ping all the way through. Okay. So with the routing protocol RIP in place, routers 1 and 2 are now talking to one another, and they are sharing what they each know about the network with the other router. And in effect, what is occurring is each router now has a complete image or a complete map of the overall network. Okay, very good. Almost forgot, we need to take a snapshot of that ping showing that it has gone through successfully. We also should ping our VLANs. So let's just do that. So we'll ping our switch C and D. So that's going to be ping 192.168.3.5. Give it a moment. Taking a little longer. Okay, so I've got a problem here. So first, let me just verify that I pinged that right. 192.168.3.5. Okay, let's look. Let's hover over our switch C here, and it is set for 3.5. Okay, that's good. And let's check switch D. That's set to 192.168.4.5. Okay, so that's good. Now, as an intermediate point, let's make sure that these two switches are responding. So I'm going to, from my router, I'm going to say ping 192.168.3.5. Let's see if I can ping from my router 2 down to my switch C. And that was successful. All right. Let's also take a look and see if I can ping to switch D. And that was successful as well. If we were to go back and ping these things again, you would find that you would get 100% response, because now that they've woken up and so on. Okay, so now let's take it one step further. Let's go over to router 1, and we'll type in C password, and then enable, and our enable password, and we'll say ping, and let's try to ping switch C and D again, 192.168.3.5. Okay, let's try 4.5.